Dr. Marnie Stockman and Nick Coniglio are entrepreneurs, authors, podcasters, and much, much more. In this episode, we apply lessons from their book, Lead It Like Lasso, and their podcast, Lens on Leadership, to consider ways to help individuals and teams find success by cultivating a diamond dog mindset.
Welcome, I'm Dave.
I'm John.
And this is Teaching Like Ted Lasso.
Warning, we expect that you have watched Ted Lasso. There will be spoilers ahead and scenes that don't make sense if you don't have some familiarity with the show.
Welcome back. It's been a while since we've had a chance to do Teaching Like Ted Lasso, and today we'd like to welcome Dr. Marnie Stockman and Nick Coniglio. Did I say that correct, Nick?
Yeah, you nailed it, David. Thank you.
Right. Well, I've listened to a few of your podcasts and a few of your guest appearances on other podcasts. So in our show notes, we will have links to those podcasts. And I would encourage our listeners and viewers, if they want to know more about the two of you, that they click on those links and they go there, because I'd like to know something I don't know. So for instance, and maybe this will all make sense, I used to be a runner. I still do long distance hikes. And I always hated out and backs. I hated covering ground that we'd already seen before. So I don't want to cover well-worn territory with you, Marnie and Nick. So tell me something new. Marnie, what don't I know about you?
Yeah, I tell you, I feel like I'm out. I'm not shy, so I had to dig deep for this one. So when I was little, I did not want to play softball. I wanted to play on the boys' baseball team. And this was back in the 70s when that was not all one thing. And my dad said, you can, as long as you can play. So every night when he would get home from work and I'd have 30 minutes of practice, and he made sure I got to start in second baseman position. So I learned a good bit about self-discipline. And if you are the only female on a boys baseball team, you learn some other things. But thankfully, Roy Kent was not the coach, so there were no inappropriate string activities involved in that.
But did you learn how to swear from your Little League coach?
You know what? I do not cuss. So in 8th grade, I cussed a nudge, and people would mock me because I was a goody two-shoes. And I realized I wanted to be a teacher. And I thought, I can't ever accidentally stub my toe in a classroom and cuss. I can't do that as a high school teacher, especially at the age of 21. So 8th grade, no more cussing for me. So writing the foreword of the book, I made Nick say all the words.
Yeah. So the audible version will be me on that page for sure, because I don't have that same willpower to not cuss, unfortunately.
So is that your what we didn't know, Nick? I think I knew that.
I'll tell you one thing that I really haven't spoken about in any of the lead up or even in the book, but I think it's very applicable to Ted Lasso is in my mid to late 20s, I was debilitated by panic attacks. I think it speaks to, we talk a little bit in the book about self-care and knowing yourself and different strategies in terms of getting help. But yeah, that was a struggle of mine that fortunately I was able to overcome. And it was rooted a little bit of all things in social anxiety and a lot about not really knowing myself. But it's kind of funny now that I seem to be on a podcast or videoing myself all the time. And I think I've kind of gotten over some of those issues that I had.
Thank you for sharing that. I really think the more kind of we get to hear from people who have had experiences like that and have found a way to self-care or mediate or just carry regardless, that's really important to get out there. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for letting me share.
Speaking of your podcast and your book, you also have a website, Lead It Like Lasso. And on that, there's a free leadership assessment called Leveling Up with Lasso. So I guess one of my questions before we share who we are is, how did you decide on which characters to include?
Well, we wanted to include all the characters. Like, to be quite honest, it was hard to whittle down the list. We knew we had to include some fan favorites. If we didn't have Roy Kent in there, we would have been strung up for sure immediately. But we also wanted to show, and we think it's really important, especially with the title of the book being Lead It Like Lasso, that it's not important that everybody is Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is who he was because he surrounded himself with his diamond dogs. And it's really important to have different personalities so that you complement each other. So we wanted to pick folks that would show complementary and not heavy overlap with the same types of personalities. There were surely a few others that we would like to include, but also because it is also part of the book, we wanted to make it very readable, quick and easy assessment, fun, but also semi-accurate, which is interesting when we have conversations with folks to find out how sometimes we've really nailed it.
So, Nick, who was maybe someone that you wish you could have included?
And I know this is going to be a little controversial, but I am a big fan of the Nate character, Nate the Great in Ted Lasso. And honestly, I think early in my career, I probably had some of the same insecurities that Nate had. I know a lot of people still have an issue with Nate, but I really saw him starting to take a turn for the better and kind of, really understand who he was and understand how he could leverage his support network. So I would have liked to have included Nate. I think he probably didn't have enough of that full character arc to fill out the rest of our book. But honestly, he's one of my favorite, and I'm going to add a second one just because I'm such a big fan of Higgins. So, and there's more, but those are the top two that come to mind. Who do you guys think we missed?
Nate, it's kind of interesting, I think, because I think if there's a season 4, we'll get to see kind of his leadership qualities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And given his path to get there, could be fascinating. Trent, I'd be curious to see kind of how you see Trent as a leader.
He's another one that comes to mind, but Trent's more of an individual contributor leader, right? As opposed to of a group. So as Nick said, comparing to kind of the rest of what we talk about with the characters, that is probably why Trent didn't make the cut, but Trent, I'm a super fan.
Yeah, and I'm with Nick. If you listen to our drafting episode, Nate and Higgins were the ones that I picked because I felt like from a leadership standpoint, I really appreciated Higgins' connections and his sort of moral compass. Again, there was some progression there, but I thought that was important. And Nate, I mean, I would agree in terms of that there was a lot of Nate in me as well. I mean, there's a lot I think everybody I talk to has some issues with like imposter syndrome. And I mean, he knew what he wanted. I think that his moral compass was off. He wanted to be a part of something, right? He wanted to belong. I mean, that there's the whole idea of the connection between believing and belonging, I think, are so strong. Yeah, he thought that was going to be by being famous, by being, he was going to get respect by being famous and those things. And so he missed out on a whole lot of other things, which I think is true. I'm not sure how it would fit with your assessment, but I see a lot of leaders who could fall into a Nate trap, right? Because they're just off slightly, and as mathematicians, we realize that just a couple degrees off and you're going to miss.
I kind of lived that experience early on in my career. I was fortunate enough to get promoted into a leadership position, and nobody really ever taught me how to lead. Everything that I did, everything I felt I did to get into that position was all about having my team grow and listening to my team and so forth and so on. But as soon as I got into that position, I kind of defaulted immediately into traditional command and control type leadership. Instead of listening, I began to speak, right? I was completely focused on outcomes instead of focusing on the growth of my team. And I was there, I was right there, but I was just, like you said, I was just a little bit off. And I think that's kind of the way you nailed it perfectly in describing Nate. So I appreciate that.
So Marnie, who did you end up with when you took the test?
Ted and Rebecca.
And what does that say?
Yep. It says, yes. Nick is the one that got me into watching Ted Lasso. And one time he said it so kindly. He said, I felt like there was something very familiar with Ted, and it was because I worked with her every day. So a lot of the silliness of Ted, for sure, bad dad puns, mom puns work the same way. Although I think the math part of me is more Rebecca with like, okay, we have a plan, we're going to make some action toward it, we're going to create a strategy and move. So it felt pretty true.
One of the first times I ever met Marnie, she talked about wanting to help everybody become the best versions of themselves, right? So I think what was that episode 1, 2, 3, what have you? I'm watching this and I was like, yeah, that sounds a lot like somebody I know. And then just the mannerisms, the goofiness, the level of positivity and optimism, that's Marnie in a nutshell, tied in with a little bit of, hey, she was also CEO of a company and has a vision. She's got a pretty good mix, better mix than I have. That's for darn sure.
Not true. We're good diamond dogs. You tell them who you are.
I was majority Roy. And I kind of get that. I own my own strengths, I think. I'm authentic. I do have a tendency to provide some constructive criticism sometimes. And, like Roy at times, maybe I'm not the most empathetic from that standpoint. And then I was kind of a mix of all things. I think a little mix of Rebecca and Sam. I think if we had Trent, we were mentioning Trent, I think I would have lined up pretty fairly with him. I think one of my biggest core values is really around curiosity and listening. And I think when I view Trent, I think he does that without bias, right? I think that's one of his greatest strengths is seeking information but not really forming much of an opinion about it. So I think that sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but I think that's something that I do really well.
Well, I think it gets back to your earlier point, Nick, about and exercises like this help us to get to know ourselves, right? Help us to
Absolutely.
be able to figure out where we can lean into our strengths and where we can rely on our diamond dogs, right, to support us in those places where we might have some blind spots or our works in progress. So, John, what about you? How did you end up when you took the assessment?
Well, I really liked about the assessment that they were like all positive statements supporting this idea that there's a diversity of ways to lead. But I came out really strongly Keeley.
Okay.
So
And do you feel like that's a good match? Oh,
I'm
Dave
nodding,
does.
yeah. Particularly because the creative part. I mean, John and his son have written a graphic novel. If you look early on and we needed characters for some of our scenes, it was John who drew the characters. So that creativity piece is certainly there. And then also that aspect of lifting other people up. I'm fortunate enough this past year to have 4 students who had John as part of a directed study just would talk about how much he supported them in terms of their success.
That's fantastic. So, 2 other questions. Are you sort of famous for being almost famous? And can you rhyme your bum off like Keely?
I don't share those characteristics necessarily. I will come up with spontaneous song lyrics, but
Perfect.
Nice.
That'll do. How about you, Dave?
So I had equal parts Keely and Sam. And I
And is
would say,
that a fair representation?
well, I
for
thought
sure.
so. Yeah, I mean, particularly, I think the same thing. So one of my other hats that I wear was I was one of the directors of our Design Thinking Academy here at Grand Valley, and so I'm a huge proponent of innovation and creative thinking and the human-centered nature of that. And I think that those are all attributes that I would connect with Keely. And then the Sam part, I think I've heard you all talk about it from a standpoint of an affinity for community and being and home and nostalgia. And I think that there are certainly elements of that as well.
Interesting. So obviously, even from just taking the assessment, it doesn't seem like you're projecting leadership as a focus on an individual. That you see leadership as something that can be shared, and that different people on a team exhibit leadership in different ways.
I think another way to say it from our perspective is that everybody's a leader. I don't care if you're a mom, a dad, if you're a CEO, if you're a manager, if you're a clerk at a convenience store, everybody can be a leader in their own way. And I think one of the things that we try to preach is that you should always start with yourself. Our book is a leadership book for life, your life. Having a personal leadership strategy is critically important. And when we start talking about scaling that up to teams or organizations, I don't think the principle's any different. If I'm either part of a team or if I'm leading a team, I want everybody on that team to have their own leadership qualities. And the best teams have a broad mix of skill sets that kind of merge together like a puzzle, at least in my experience, in my opinion.
Interesting. So how did you get there? Right? Like you said, you personally were kind of put into this place where you didn't have any of that preparation. So how did you come to have this understanding?
A couple of things. Me personally, I mean, I had mentors, experience in itself. I read a ton of books on it. So one of my core values is continuous learning, right? To always try to get better. But I think it's about life experiences. Not that somebody young can't necessarily be a leader, but we go by the mantra that you're not born a leader, you learn to become a leader over time. And from my perspective, I don't think that journey ever ends. At least I hope it doesn't, right? I hope it always motivates me to become a better person, better leader of myself, first and foremost, because I think if you don't know how to lead yourself, you really you're kind of have your hands tied behind your back if you're trying to lead other people. And I recognize that I've had so many mistakes and I've had so many failures as a leader. And that's one of the ways to get there is to fail, to try, have at it and fail and learn from it. I always think that you just keep your eyes open and it's continuous learning. Marnie saved me here. Phil, what did I miss with that?
No, I think that's a good explanation. I also think that, well, Nick in particular, as he said, very Trent Krim-like, and a very good listener and a good questioner, but also pulls out the best in others, which I think is a strong leadership skill. And Nick and I met about a dozen years ago. And when I joined the team, he was like the E.F. Hutton, when Nick speaks, everybody listens type of person. But I think that also in pulling out strengths from others to build a team, that definitely grows your own leadership skills. I think one important thing about leaders is their ability to help others obviously become the best version of themselves, but to pull that out of them and to help them participate in the broader picture is a way to help grow along the way. I joined when Nick was already well established as that leader. So it's always interesting to me to learn some of the background on podcasts from him.
Marnie, do you see, as you've grown as a leader, I'm thinking about most of our listeners probably have some connection with education. What aspects of that would you want a teacher to know or to be thinking about?
As I said, I started as a high school math teacher, and and I was 21. And what you can't tell on Zoom is I'm all of 5'5". So I'm not a big, I'm no Rebecca Welton. The first thing I did was slam the door and said, the bell rang. What are you doing talking? Because I had to, in fact, establish like, this is my house. And I had one poster in my years of teaching. It was Lucy from Charlie Brown. It said, save time, see things my way. For sure, it didn't stay that way. And around December, some kid would come up to me and say, like, first, you're not as tall as I thought you were. Because they were always, thinking I was a giant looming over their desk. And then they would say, like, oh, you're not as bad as I thought, right? Like, we can have fun in this class. But I had to sort of establish that. So I'm not sure that that's the right way to go about it. But some things that I do think teachers need to do is learn about the students. We talk about a personal operating system. And if you remember, Ted goes and asks Rebecca and Keely to figure out Jamie's operating instructions so he could figure out the motivators. And I think that is critically important. Also, a TED lesson, names are critically important. My very first class I ever taught, and I made sure I went to another teacher and said, how do I pronounce this? Because one, I was going to set myself up for failure if I'd botched it along the way. But two, I could reel them in if they could, get to know their names. So I think there are a lot of lessons inside of TED to take to a classroom. I think using inspirational quotes, of course, or I could go on for days on this, but my first reaction is to say really get to know the students, but also show your authentic version to the students. I can remember one day I was being observed, and when they left, one of the kids said, "Miss Stockman, you're not like the other teachers. Like you're just the same, you tell the same dumb stories, whether you're being observed or not." And I said, if you're not always doing the best version of what you think you should be doing in your job, you're not being authentic, then what are you doing, right? You might need to rethink what you're doing. So yeah, I think it's important that I tell these stories because you listen to the stories and that'll make you a better version.
That's the start of it. Relationships are always the start of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by listening to you guys. I was thinking about that as kind of a transition to wondering about who you see as one of the great ensembles of all time.
I listened to your ensemble episode, first round, and then I think the Ted Lasso clip was brilliant.
The following is a brief portion of the skit made by the Ted Lasso cast.
Okay, y'all, let's focus up. Got a big night ahead of us, the SAG Awards. And we are nominated for Outstanding Performance by an Ensemble in a Comedy Series. How about that? We'll shoot you straight. Our competition tonight is tougher than ice-cold beef jerky. What we got, Coach?
Dead to me, the flight attendant, the great, Schitt's Creek.
Coach, may I suggest we just turn off the television and go to bed?
Yeah. Come on now, I know that's an intimidating lineup, and shoot, I can't think of better ensembles than those four right there. Can you?
And I am first terrible at music, and Nick is brilliant at sports. So I thought I got to bring something else to the table. So I'm going to go with Star Wars because you've got Yoda as a mentor, right? Nick and I drafted Diamond Dogs last week on our show. And so I thought Yoda was a good mentor, and Princess Leia was a strategist, and Han Solo was a challenger. And then you've got Chewbacca, because who doesn't need just a big lovable guy to scream and shout on there? And Obi-Wan for the mental, spiritual version. So I'll say Star Wars.
That seems like so much more of an interesting and caring response than what I'm gonna say. If you've read the book or listened, I'm a diehard sports fan, rooted by the New York Jets. But I grew up in Long Island, right, where you were either Yankees, Giants, Rangers, or Mets, Jets, and Islanders. I really got the short end of the stick there with the Mets and the Jets specifically. But when I go ensemble, I got to go sports teams. I really want to go with mine. And fortunately, when I grew up, and this is where I'm probably going to lose everybody, but I had the New York Islanders between 1980 and 83, where they won 4 straight Stanley Cups. I believe they still hold the modern record for winning 19 straight playoff series. They got eliminated last night. Sad case. They haven't been good really since then. But they had everything, right? They had skill with Mike Bossy and leaders with Brian Trottier and Dennis Potvin. They had grit with Bobby Nystrom and Clark Gillies. They had a leadership in coach and GM with Al Arbor and Bill Torrey, who really provided the structure for sustained success. They were specifically known around ability to communicate and connect with their players. And the team itself, it was a dynasty. They were driven by the dynasty. So they had that common goal. But I don't know if anybody cares or realizes, not being from Long Island, but Long Island is really the only part of the New York City metropolitan area that doesn't really have its own sports team, right? They all play in the city or Jersey, what have you. And the Islanders played on the island, and they really made an impact. And that was part of their success, is they kind of integrated within the whole community. They became part of the community, and the community reciprocated. I don't know if that's the type of answer you're looking for, but that's what I think of when I think of the greatest ensemble.
Yeah, no, that's great. Oh, I loved watching those Bossy teams play.
Yeah.
He made everybody so good.
Yeah, and they were so resilient. You know, they would always get down a couple of goals, and they facing elimination, they'd come back. That was the heyday. That was my 11 to 14-year-old days, where I was just, they were everything to me.
I have trouble answering these questions. Like I can't even pick a genre. Am I going to talk about music or sports or movies or writing? I was thinking about So I'm old, and this is even too old for me, but I have this amazing love for the writing room of Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows. Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Woody Allen and
Okay.
kind of a bunch of other veteran writers, and just how even as notable as they were individually, they didn't let that get in the way of working together to create whole new things.
So if you listen to the last one, I said the Michigan football team that just won the national championship. And one of the things I want to talk about in the game we're playing is how do you create effective teams, right? How do you organize teams so that they're greater than the sum of the part? And then I started thinking, so who is a team that overachieved? And all you have to do is look to Ted Lasso again, and he tells us it was the Olympic team, the 1980
Yep.
Miracle on Ice. This was a group of folks that barely anybody knew who ended up beating some of the best teams in the world. That Brooks did something to be able to bring them together. And I think back to your point, Nick, I don't think it's so important who we pick, it's why we pick them. I mean, when you're talking about a team that has community and has culture, right? And works together. I mean, that's the key. And we could say that about lots of different teams, but again, it's about those descriptions that we want to think about. So for our purposes here, I started by thinking about, well, let's just do the draft again. But then you all did your draft and we did a draft. And I've already told you I hate covering, ground that we've been before. And so I thought, let's try something different. And then I was also considering, how do I improve this effective group sort of nature, effective teams in my classroom? I can't do it like I did when I was a coach, where I'd cut people in order to be able to build the culture that I was looking for, or trade people away or whatever. But I wanted to think about it. And I know that one of the ways that Peter Liljedahl talks about having effective groups is randomizing them every day. And so what I tried to do is randomize. I figured, let's pick some characters that we know. We all know the Ted Lasso characters. Let's pick some characters. Imagine they're in my classroom and we're going to be working on a project, and I've sorted them out. Now, Peter's got some great research that shows if you do that every day, that could
Yes,
work.
good things happen. I love that article. I sent it to a friend who just got a job as a supervisor. So thank you.
But I also talked to a lot of teachers who were like, yeah, but that's the one thing that I have to at least be a little judicious about, because there are times where I don't want these folks being in the same group and I may need to make those adjustments. So
Right.
with that being said, I sorted everybody out, and all of us have a team that we're imagining. So again, what I would hope is, if this were my class, that I'd reach out to my colleagues and say, well, here, what do you all know about these folks and how might we organize them? So the goal isn't here for us to get the best
The
team,
winning team.
a winning team, right? But the goal is for us to think about, how could we make sure all of the teams are successful? I found 20 characters. I split them into 5 groups of 4. So we have an other that we also want to keep our attention toward. But I guess I'd just like us to start out by introducing our teams and giving our initial impressions. So Nick, why don't you start? Who's on your team and what do you think?
Yeah, I'm excited. I even gave my team a name. It's called Team Psychological Safety Not. Yeah, so I have our favorite Kitman, Will, whose last name actually is Kitman. I have Edwin Okofu, known for his tantrums and such. I've got the one, the only Rupert Mannion, and I've got Roy Kent. I have nothing but good things to say about Roy Kent, but yeah, I'm excited about this team. At first I was like, huh, this is interesting. How are we going to make these work together? But yeah, that's my introduction.
Thanks, Nick. What about you, John? Who's on your team and what do you think?
Wish I had thought about a name for my team. I have Jack, Keely's significant other for a while, major CEO and mover and shaker. I have Coach Beard, who, if I was drafting, I think I might have picked, I might have been a top pick for me. I have May, successful local business owner, also able to keep large groups of people in control. And I have Ted,
So what do you think about your team overall? Do you think it could be successful or?
Yeah, I think Jack is the one that you think about how to help her fit in, how to help her kind of establish a working relationship, maybe breaking in. You know, Beard, May, and Ted have kind of a lot of shared experience and strong ties together. So, what do you do to help Jack get integrated where she's really a part of the team? So that's what I was wondering about.
Kind of like the new kid that moves in.
Yeah.
Marnie, what about you?
So I have Jan Moss, Isaac, Sharon, Dr. Sharon Fieldstone, and Rebecca. When I look at now, I decide I want to give it a name because that sounds fun. So my husband's name is Frank, and we always say it's not just his name, it's his adjective. And these folks, this is the most direct. You are going to get honest, direct, immediate feedback from this team. So maybe the directed, I don't know, something along those lines.
So I have Trent, Shandy, Keely, and Danny. And as I look at that team, first of all, I'm scared to death of having Shandy and Keely in the same group. This, I
And
think,
goats on your desks. That would be my biggest concern.
and so this would be one definitely I think I need to make at least one trade with.
Yeah.
But I feel like all of them have some creativity and joy. One of the things I take away from Shandy is that she does have lots of creative ideas. She
sure.
just might need some boundaries and some direction, and how might we help that?
She could maybe use some frank feedback. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah. Ooh, so maybe there's a possibility. And then on
Perfect.
our other team, we've got, which is interesting, Nick, a bunch of our favorites, right? Nate,
Yeah.
Higgins, Jamie, and Sam. And I feel pretty good about that group already. I don't I just see that as some place, and again, this I swear it was all random, but that might be a place where we can just be thinking about moving people.
It's
Yeah,
interesting.
I hear other is a good trade partner. That's what I heard. Through the grapevine.
Very, very agreeable, I hear. So Nick, why don't you start? What are you thinking about? What trade are you thinking about making and why?
I honestly do feel pretty good about my team. And I think you guys come from more of an education perspective. When I think about teams, I'm always in the business world, right? So I love Roy as my leader, right? My CEO type person, his honesty, his no nonsense approach kind of brings that level of accountability. And I think he kind of leads us with that whole motto, don't you dare settle for fine, which I love. Will's like my operations guy, right? He's very supportive as a team player. He kind of understands the day-to-day operations, has a pulse on what's going on because he's always in,
right room.
he's in the right room at all the time. So he's my chief of staff or operations guy. I'm gonna stick with Rupert because I'm gonna assume I can't trade two people. So Rupert's like my strategy officer, right? And I got Roy though, who can keep him in check. I think it was very important to have Roy on my group, right? Because he's not going to let Rupert kind of just go off and be his bad self. But he's strategic, he's cunning. We're going to try to leverage that to the best of our abilities. So then I've got Edwin, right? Which is, unless I'm looking for an angel investor, right? I'm not really looking to do much with Edwin. And I look at my team and I'm kind of missing a little bit around, probably a lot around optimism, positivity. I'm missing a sense of team building and community and stuff like that. So my number one trade target, and it's a bit ironic, is Edwin for Sam. I would really like Sam to kind of round out my team, assuming I had Roy, Rupert, and Will. So I don't know if others open to trading him, but I would feel real good about that because that kind of Sam kind of brings in the pieces that the other three really didn't have to kind of put that puzzle together. So that's where I was going with that.
That's funny. I thought you were going to say May because she was like, she's older like Rupert and would be able to, but I like Sam for the good reasons.
But Roy's got to keep Rupert in check with
Yeah.
Sam and Will specifically, because if not,
he'll run
then
over him.
he's going to run over.
Yeah, and so in the original draft, one of the things we had was this idea of drafting a disruptor.
Yeah.
Thinking about Coach Beard talking about Jamie early on is, the poop in the punch bowl.
Yeah.
But we learn later on, right, that Jamie has some redeemable qualities and actually becomes very Ted-like by season 3. And I would imagine if it would continue, you'd see even more of that, right? Even to the rhyming. So I think I like what you're saying about Rupert, and I think he has some, and we see in the last season that he does have some redeemable qualities. Even in the first season, he's very charismatic, and people look to him, and he's comfortable speaking in front of a large audience and things like that. But yeah, having somebody who's able to be frank. So I was wondering if you were going to grab somebody from Marnie because you might need a frank one. But Roy probably could fit into Marnie's team as well as being.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah.
So John, what about you? Are you satisfied with your team, or do you want to make a trade? Can we be successful with this team?
It's a pretty good team. I think we've got some practicality. The one thing I already talked about how it'd be tough to integrate Jack, but she definitely brings a lot of strong leadership qualities that are distinct from the other three. If I did make a trade, I would wonder if Marnie would be interested in maybe Isaac for Jack, because I see Isaac as one of those kind of practical, get things done, make sure the work gets done.
So the interesting part of putting Jack on the team, that then gives me 3 women. Rebecca, being the strong, also wealthy female, is probably one that really could help bring Jack into the fold because they've got some similarities, because sometimes the uber wealthy just don't know how to relate to the rest of the world. So I'll switch you Isaac and Jack. I'm easy going. Nick will tell you I'm a pleaser person. So
That's an excellent reason, I think, to pick up Jack.
although, by golly, if there were 4 J's, I'd be trying to trade for Jamie and somebody else just so I could alliterate and make Dave envious of my team.
So you're feeling good about that team, John. You think my if I put them all together, they can be successful.
That's where I'm at with that.
Marnie, how about you? You've made one trade. Do you see another trade that you might need to make
We have a
success?
very serious team. This is I mean, I get it. In 2nd grade, I would have loved this team. We would have been cutthroat for sure. And if I put Shandy on there, I could go with the all-female team, which for chips on your shoulder, that's always a good way to go. But would like some lighter comic relief, maybe. Would love to trade Jan for Jamie. Jan is just so direct that with these other 3, I think Jamie would lighten it up a bit. And I can trade a J for a J that way.
All right. Any thoughts?
So at this point, I feel like Jamie is well respected enough on the team as a great player. He'll be able to pull Rebecca, right? She won't get to just be all serious all the time. There may be some issues from Jack and Keely, but I think Jamie's growing up, and so he could use a little growth in that area as well. So why not? And then I think he might get Sharon to crack a smile, which would be helpful. But Sharon also can help ease up the team when they need to relook at themselves.
So I'm sitting here really thinking that I have to do something either with Shandy or Keely. My gut.
Trading Keely? Like
Well, so part of it is one, again, recognizing that while I've been assigned this team, all of them are my teams.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So I had to get over the ego part of that because I don't want to. I would definitely want Keely on if I had my own team, my own set of Diamond Dogs. She would be high up on there. However, I feel like in terms of disruptors, with the exception of John, everybody's already got sort of a disruptor on their team. And if I got rid of Shandy, then I wouldn't trade Shandy for Edwin. I don't know. Well, though, would I? Talk me through this, guys. What do you think? What would a Shandy for Edwin do for us?
So I think Danny's positivity would outweigh some of Edwin. Same thing with Keely. And I think Trent asks great questions. And we love Adam Grant's book, Think Again. I think maybe Trent can ask some questions to help Edwin think again.
Nick, I see you nodding. What are your thoughts?
I want you to take Nate personally. I want you to swap out Shandy for Nate because I think Nate can learn so much from Trent and Keely and even from Danny. And I think we're in this to get Nate to that next level. So I personally, if I were you, and I understand everything you said earlier, but I'm rooting for Nate. I'm not rooting for you, Dave. So I would love for you to swap out Shandy for Nate and get Nate on the right track for season 4 because surrounded by those people, I think that's like the perfect group of people for him to learn with.
Then as a teacher, I just sit my chair next to this other team.
Yes. Shandy and Jan together will be a fascinating group. It's interesting, they may well ignore Edwin because they're like, yeah, all of your problems are not what that it'll be a hand in the face kind of thing. Higgins will have his work cut out.
Yeah, I don't want to put, I like Higgins a lot there too. John, what do you think?
Thinking teacher-wise about these are groups in my room.
Yeah.
With Shandy and Edwin. Edwin is prone to carrying out outrageous things, and Shandy is providing the ideas for that. I see as possibly an issue. But it's hard to know, like, who would be willing to, you're trying to break up Shandy and Keely.
After all the discussion, Dave decided to trade Keely for Edwin.
And that puts Keely with Nate, which again gives him some of the support that he needs.
And Higgins, yeah, I like that.
What I liked about the idea of Nate and Shandy is Nate is somebody who has kind of gone through that and gotten to the other side. And that, that sometimes that's what somebody like Shandy just needs, the support of somebody who's been there, has self-destructed, and has put it back together.
Come back from it. This is not just having done this. So my seating charts used to be strips of paper with little individual that I would tape down and before computers where you could just rearrange them. And I would absolutely do this. Nope, can't sit in this row. Nope, can't. So this feels very familiar to me.
And I've been doing the like truly random. I used to do kind of a pseudo random where I could avoid putting together the people that I thought would be problematic together.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing the actually random. So I get some of these groups like the other, and right. And it's not terrible to have the people who I need to talk to the most frequently sitting together.
Same place.
Right?
That's a good point.
Because I can just sit in on their group a little bit more and do a little more direct modeling.
So I'm wondering, John, I'm still a little, I mean, you all made the point about Shandy and Edwin being together, that could explode. I'm wondering, John, if you'd be willing to trade May and Shandy.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll miss May, but I feel like Ted could be the good influence on Shandy. Have to watch out for some weird Shandy beard interactions.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like these are some teams that could be successful in my classroom. Team 1 is Will, Sam, Rupert, Roy. Team 2, Isaac, Beard, Shandy, Ted. Team 3, Jamie, Sharon, Jack, Rebecca. Team 4, Trent, May, Edwin, Danny. And Team 5, Nate, Higgins, Jan, and Keely.
So we would love to come be guest presenters in your classroom. We're always trying to find a way to get our book into any of these people's hands. So we will happily come provide the books and teach a lesson in this class and do some group activities.
You say that as a joke, but once you put it out there, I think that's something I'd happily take advantage of.
I've done it before. I'm not afraid to do that.
Excellent.
So maybe talk a little bit about, to kind of bring this full circle to your work, how does this fit with either the cost analysis thing that you did in the last episode or the Wooden's pyramid work that you do at the end of each of your episodes?
I don't know that the cost was kind of a one-off. That was more of a strategy play and to make the draft more interesting. That's not really a core message that we typically deliver. Our whole thing is building out a personal board of advisors and really tying it back to Diamond Dogs, surrounding yourself with people that can hold you accountable, that you trust, that can help you become better every day. And it kind of goes back to the assessment that you kicked off the beginning of the conversation with, right? Understanding who you are and where your opportunity for growth is. And to us, it's surrounding yourself with people that have complementary skills to you that will challenge you to get better. We call it a challenge network in our book. John Wooden's Pyramid of Success scoring is all about identifying what traits that you excel at, where you might need work on, and that's kind of how it all ties in to what we believe is critically important for anybody, which is a support network or your diamond dogs to help you grow and get better.
One thing that we were talking about in the land of sort of core values and culture, we often speak to people define their traits for their company, their classroom, themselves, etc. And then culture is how that plays out. Meaning, are your behaviors aligned with core values? So when it would be interesting in a classroom to have John Wooden's pyramid and talk about, maybe pick 1, 2, 3 in a particular day and have people reflect on if their behaviors displayed any of that. One of the things that we've learned from doing that John Wooden activity is that in a given 30-minute episode, right, it's easy to pick 2 or 3. I think the writers were brilliant. It's easy to pick 2 or 3 different elements of that pyramid of success and say, this episode was really highlighting people's strengths and weaknesses around this. And it would be interesting to have that as an element in a classroom of, all right, how was the group work in terms of trustworthiness, self-improvement, industriousness? How did that play out? And is it different than how industrious your group was yesterday? And what behaviors can you make to improve that?
And does the team overall, if you're randomly assigning them, does the team, if I'm on team A one week and team B the next week, does the industriousness change, or the loyalty or the cooperation, depending on the different types of the team dynamics, right? We're talking about team dynamics depending on that.
We have a colleague that studies something called complex instruction that thinks about that kind of, how do you get everybody valued in the team kind of every time? This sounds like kind of a different perspective on similar issues.
That is always the challenge when you ask, right, what elements do we talk about that would impact in a classroom? And it's the really getting to know everyone, right? And where their strengths lie and their weaknesses and their skills, hobbies. You never know. When I taught 5 periods of geometry and 1 of physical science, which was not my strength. Like, I was 1 chapter ahead of the students. That was my first year teaching. And we were doing the 4-stroke piston engine. In a shocking turn of events, I knew 0.0 things about a 4-stroke piston engine, right? And so the night before, I'm like, intake, compression, power, going through exhaust. And I was being observed that day. I was squirrely freshman. And I went up and said, today we're going to talk about the 4-stroke piston engine. And a child who was in the special ed program raised his hand. I was Miss Delara at the time. Oh, Miss Delara, can I share? Can I share? And I thought, oh, John, I sure hope you know what, and I live in a rural area where a lot of folks know a lot of things about a lot of stuff I don't know. And I said, yeah, John, absolutely. Come tell us what you've got. And he did a brilliant job with it. So it was just, and I got high praise for what was really luck when she said, way to encourage folks who don't really always speak out in class and get a chance to lead. It was luck on my part. I can take 0 credit for it, but I feel like, yeah, if you can find ways to include folks in the lesson, makes it stronger for everyone.
I don't think you can take 0 credit, because, I mean, you're in a position where a lot of people could have been nervous or afraid, especially with it there being stakes that day, and you were willing to take a risk.
I was nervous. Yes, fair.
Marnie, I know you and I have been both listening. Well, you have now listened to John U. Bacon's book, Become Lead, and that is setting the conditions to make sure that effective teams can flourish, but doing whatever we can to turn over the learning and the work to the people who need to do the learning, and that's the students.
Yeah.
As John said, we've got a colleague who's thinking about this idea of teamwork, and a lot of that comes with norms, and a lot of that comes with group roles. And I will admit that I'm okay with the norms, but I struggle with the group roles. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, well, what would happen if instead of group roles, I'd said, okay, you're Trent today. And what does that mean?
I do love the idea of telling someone that they're Trent Krim for the day. Remember the practice where they had to act as someone else? I think one of the things that we talk a lot about is the vulnerability that Ted played out. And I can remember I had a tough class, but we were doing integers. So I had them rate activities from their life from the worst at -5 to a +5. And I said, you're going to put this in front of the class. So you only have to share what you want to share. But it was pretty interesting when this class talked about their negatives with each other and shared that, how the dynamic in that class changed a good bit from getting a little bit vulnerable.
But to your point, I'd love my students to be able to surround themselves with the Diamond Dogs. However, there's also teams that they are where they're with people who they might not necessarily surround themselves. How do we ensure that those groups are effective?
I think we can, since we're all on this, we have this shared passion with Ted Lasso, right? We take a lesson from Ted, right? And Marnie mentioned it earlier, finding out what motivates what does motivate those people that are your disruptors, right? You need to find a way to work with those people. You can't just, I work predominantly in a business setting. I can take care of this pretty easily by getting rid of the disruptors, right? But you guys are talking about environments where that's not easily done. So what do you have to do? And what is my first option to do in a business environment? It's to try to get those people on board with the team. And how do you do that? You find out what makes them tick. What are their operating instructions? What motivates them? What demotivates them? And then you track it and you measure if you're making progress. And if you're not, you have to, like Ted did with Jamie, he had to keep going back and working on it, working on it, working on it. But he didn't give up on the process, right? Now, Rebecca forced his hand by sending Jamie back to Man City, and Ted was like, no, that's not what I wanted to have happen. He was working on making it work. So I don't know if there's a magic panacea or anything to that effect to doing it other than trying to truly understand what motivates somebody and work with them to, maybe make some accommodations with the team to see if that can fit into the whole dynamic.
Yeah, my wife and I wrote a book called Designing Math Adventures. And Nick, I really appreciate what you're sharing because Kathy wrote one of the chapters in it. She talks about she was a first grade teacher and she had a student who was a disruptor. I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but a disruptor. He was somebody who, as a first grader, was throwing tables around or running away from school, doing all these things. And my wife and the behavior consultant they tried everything to try to get this kid back on track. They couldn't get rid of him. They tried everything to try to get the kid back on track. And then finally, out of desperation, they asked him, "What is it that you want?" And he said, "I want to be the janitor." They're like, "What?" He goes, "I want to be the janitor, and here's the things I want to do." I mean, what he wanted to do is feel like he was making a difference and that he was part of something bigger. But he didn't know he was first grade. He didn't know how to articulate it. It was nothing that they would have expected that.
And props to that kid for even knowing how to answer that
Yeah,
question,
no
right?
kidding.
Because
But we don't ask that. And it also reminds me in the end of season 2, where they're just trying to decide at halftime if they're going to keep with the false 9 or not.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And they're going back and forth. And what does Roy say? Ask them, right? They're the ones who are having to put this together. And you could tell that they were surprised that they were being asked anything.
Yeah.
And again, I
Yeah.
think so back to both your point, I think that that's sort of what I would need to do I'd love to, I'm not sure I'd love, but it'd be interesting to sit down with Edwin and ask him what it was that
What do you want?
maybe he wants to be the janitor too.
Maybe.
John, anything you want to ask?
No, just looking forward to reading your book and love your perspective that you shared with us today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I've had a ton of fun. I thought the game was fun. I enjoyed the ensemble activity. Yeah, I'm really glad you guys invited us. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for inviting us. This has been
Well,
fun.
good. Well, we appreciate you as well and the work that you're doing and continued success. We will certainly put links to your website and in particular focus on the book and the podcast. Is there anything else that are you gonna be on any other podcast coming up that you can talk about? Or when will you be presenting in my classroom? What else what else would you like to share?
But we got a master class that's coming out pretty soon. We're hoping that's going to be out on, one of the services like Udemy or something to that effect. And yeah, I mean, all I say is I thought this was a very engaging conversation, and I would love to stay in touch with you guys, and I'm definitely going to follow you guys for more. This has been fun.
Well, same. And as things become available, just shoot it our way. If it makes it before I do the editing, I'll definitely put it in the show notes. If it's afterwards, we'll definitely put it on our socials. So thank you so much for your time. We've gone much longer than we normally do, but this really has been a blast. So thank you very much.
If you have ideas for a bonus episode related to one of our themes or something new, please contact us on Twitter at Like Lasso or via email teachinglikeTedLasso@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
So are you guys pro season 4?
I think Nick has a really good idea for season 4. So now I'm going to force Nick to remember what he said about season 4, but I do really like his idea.
If not, I remember it.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, I don't think
I
it's
thought
that
it was
good of an idea
genius.
about the tie into MLS and doing the reverse fish out of water with
Yep.
somebody from the UK coming to the
Wow.
US. And yeah, I just want more. But like I said, it could be something completely different, right? But just the way the feels that show gives you, and after every episode, it just makes you feel good. And I want more of it. I'm selfish that way.